reports and analysis, and by no small means a Royal Commission, which has seen things change a little bit for regional integration now. We find that our RICKs are now known as Family Violence Principal Strategic Advisors, and ironically we find that our Family Violence Committees are now known as RICKs, or Regional Integration Committees. So what these groups do now is absolutely support the area-based integration of the sectors around family violence and provide some vertical integration up into central agencies and other parts of the sector. We're thrilled to bits that we're auspiced by a good number of different types of agencies, and that includes some women's health networks, some specialist family violence agencies and community health organisations. We were pleased to see and to understand through the recommendations of the Royal Commission into Family Violence is that the sorts of things that we look to support through regional integration are workforce development at a regional level, certainly looking at and reporting on data system reforms, data collection and analysis, hence our great interest in supporting every opportunity there is to find and use good data. We look at engaging all parts of the system. We provide feedback to government, and we promote relationships at a regional level along with regional governance structures and arrangements. What slide are we on there? Oh, look at that. Oh, something's gone funny with this. There you go. That's got away. So as I said, our core role, or the role that all of the regional integration committees across the state have, is to improve the integration of family violence systems and responses to victim survivors and perpetrators. So that's a common goal that you'll see us share in all the work we do. But we do this in a range of locally diverse ways, drawing our different skills and expertise, always tied to common goals. And some of those common goals that were identified as we worked as part of the RICKIE project were around governance and system leadership, the integration of reform initiatives, workforce development, and service data collection and local area profiling. So we know the work we do, we're always looking for different and better ways of utilising data to make sure that we're effective. The reach of our committees around the state is broad. As I said, our committees are going to include our specialist family violence agencies, all sorts of community sector agencies, our primary care partnerships, representatives from the health sector, the education sector. We see legal aid, community legal sector involved. We have statutory participation in our committees, so that includes not only DHHS and child protection, but also VicPol and courts. And there are slight variations around how this works around the state, but essentially we have a good broad representation who share a common goal. At a statewide level, you can expect that your PSAs will be sometimes sitting on committees such as this RICKIE project, our industry task force, the statewide Family Violence Committee, the Respectful Relationships Advisory Group, the Elder Abuse Working Party, the Specialist Family Violence Court Implementation Committee. And we're also thrilled to bits to have really good, strong and important relationships with our peaks, including DVVIC, No to Violence, and others where it's appropriate for us to do so. So we would invite you, if the local Regional Implementation Committee or your PSA is not known to you, please take every opportunity to get in touch, and you can find our contact details on the lookout. So that's the right slide, Jeva, thank you. In addition to supporting regional integration and also some vertical integration, some of the projects we currently have going around the state include delivering the MARAM collaborative practice training, but some of our areas are also mapping the local area MARAM training needs, and they're also supporting agencies to map and embed within themselves who has MARAM responsibilities and then understand that at an area-based level. We've also put a lot of energy into supporting the FIS and the CIS and it being embedded and used. Some of this has involved executive level conversations, so organisations understand how it fits in with their work and what the expectations are around their workforces. We've also developed training videos and handbooks to support the rollout of the FIS and the CIS. At the moment, some of us are thinking about what we need to do to assist our agencies to align to the gender equality legislation and the changes and improvements that we might need to support people with over the next year or two. Some of us are exploring the use of the Community Services Quality Governance Framework to further support, embedding the family violence reform and how that can help agencies with change. And we are very, very thrilled always to be either conducting research ourselves or partnering with other agencies, universities to undertake research. It's especially pleasing that we are now able to support student placements in the time of COVID, knowing that Zoom has become really effective in that space. And we try to do that for two reasons. One is to access as much research as we can. You know, we want to be as strongly evidence-based in our integration work as we can be, but we're also very, very mindful of what we can do in that space to help to build the workforce going forward. So finally, Gemma, that's cute, flick the page, just like magic. Why do we do this work? So when we went back to the Goulburn Family Violence Executive at the start of the RICKIE project, we asked them, you know, this project, it's being funded, you know, the importance of regional integration is recognised, we want to understand it more. What is the one thing that we really want to know? What drives us to do the work we do? And a question that the Goulburn Family Violence Executive asks itself, and it's not very different to those that every other regional integration committee asks around the state, is are we improving the lived experience of people who are experiencing family violence, which is a funny mouthful. But at the end of the day, we feel strongly that integration is an important part of system reform, and we really do want to make sure that we're doing it well. So from the point of view of the PSA participation on this project, it has been around making sure that we can access and support the very best data going forward for the purposes of regional integration. So we're pleased to have been consulted, and we hope that, you know, we've been able to provide some sort of valuable contribution. Thank you, Robin.
Thanks, Alison. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land where I am today, the Jara people of the Dja Dja Wurrung, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So I'm Robin Trainer from the Centre for Nonviolence in Bendigo, and we auspice the Loddon Principal Strategic Advisor role. And I have been the statewide auspice representative on the RICKIE reference and leadership group after 2 successful data parties when the reference and governance groups were merged, working with the Principal Strategic Advisor representatives on this project since February this year. How did the project come about? So the RICKIE project was first proposed in 2018 to further implement the Family Violence Royal Commission recommendations, and it was developed in consultation with the statewide Family Violence Integration Advisory Committee to co-design and inform the RICKIE project to be successfully funded in 2019. So there were 4 key goals identified in the proposal. The first, that there was a goal to determine the Family Violence Regional Integration Committee's research and evaluation needs, reviewing data set access that was already publicly available, and also identifying data gaps. The purpose of the project was also to undertake a regionally disaggregated data analysis. So that was to look at what data is publicly available statewide and what might be missing at a local government or regional level. It was also about developing a Family Violence Regional Integration Committee research and evaluation framework to provide a common data platform to share data, but also to start to monitor what the themes, gaps and barriers were at a statewide and regional level. So as Alison said, family violence regional integration is an important key feature of the current reforms, and it guides our policy and practice. These committees were first developed in 2006 to provide that leadership and to maintain a strong focus on regional service and system coordination, and provide a structure for service and system integration. Family violence integration is about coordinating service and system interventions to family violence through the implementation of policy and practice to ensure that community and service responses are tilted towards the safety of women and children and the accountability of perpetrators of family violence. It's about working together with shared understandings, common frameworks, and building family violence workforce capacity and capability. A research and evaluation framework enhances the capacity of family violence regional integration committees by identifying both the methodology and methods that support committees to undertake evidence-based system integration work. Specifically, the framework supports the Family Violence Regional Integration Committees to identify system issues, to develop recommendations for addressing issues and also supporting sector reform, particularly in the policy reform process, as well as supporting strategic planning through the framework, enabling a statewide approach to the evaluation of regional integration committee work. So what are the benefits of this framework? And if you see the quote up the top from the Royal Commission into Family Violence, there's plenty of data in the system. Funded agencies, non-funded agencies, Victoria Police and the court system all gather and collect and to varying degrees communicate data and information about family violence. However, there is no common system of data collection, and that refers to a number of recommendations. So what are the opportunities for the monitoring, research and evaluation framework within regional committees and the leadership group statewide? This project links key recommendations in relation to data collection and also building capacity within regional integration committees to be able to contribute to reforms and system integration in an informed way. It provides capability and capacity through building data monitoring and evaluation across the statewide Family Violence Integrated Advisory Committee and also within regional integration committees. A strong focus in stage one is about implementing a consistent monitoring system to map and monitor local and regional data trends and themes. It provides a common platform for the committees to work together to see what the data is telling them, what data is available and what data might be missing to make the story and develop that picture of what is happening in relation to qualitative data, quantitative data, but also lived experience. In relation to evaluation, this framework provides an opportunity to build that regional data access, sharing data and analysing it through ethical structures to demonstrate regional needs and contribute to reforms. It helps us to build service and system integration so that we have developed data supported and informed decision making and monitoring processes regionally and statewide, and to build capacity and structures to contribute to the evidence base and system planning. This framework in the next phases will allow us to start to think about what research capability we have at a regional and local level, but also opportunities for collaboration and partnership, so that service and system integration can be about working together with that shared purpose and values. So this project in the next phases provides opportunities for the regional integration committees to inform work that's happening within the statewide Family Violence Advisory Committee. This relies on establishing strong and ethical partnerships to guide evaluation and research, to contribute to a further evidence base, particularly in the lived experience space. It provides opportunities to include and represent lived experience, to contribute to systems change, and to tailor data access and capture to evaluate and represent regional needs to contribute to reform thinking. This framework also provides opportunity to develop partnerships and to build a regional foundation for social planning and decision making. So through this framework, we have the opportunity to implement a common data dashboard and structure for monitoring and evaluation, both at a regional level and statewide. All of these recommendations within the framework and the purpose of the framework links to the Royal Commission Family Violence role articulated in the recommendations to guide and implement and report on workforce development at the regional level, to support and report on implementation of data system reforms, data collection and analysis, to extend engagement with system advocates to all forms of family violence, and to provide feedback to government on the regional implementation of the statewide Family Violence Action Plan, to support intended system outcomes, to ensure mutually supportive working relationships with regional primary prevention leaders, and to collaboratively determine appropriate regional governance arrangements. It's also about creating common platforms to support the integration at a regional level, as well as implementation of reforms, so that decisions can be informed and data can be used to create a better service and system response for people experiencing family violence and also people who are using family violence. And I'll now hand on to the next person.
So thank you very much, Robin and Alison, for setting up and providing both the background and the grounding for the project. So I'm Kathy Humphries from University of Melbourne, and I just wanted to start by introducing our team. So I'll be introducing the team and then looking at handing over to Gemma and then David Rose. So our team drew together a range of interdisciplinary researchers with a wide range of experience and skills, so that Gemma provided the linchpin for the whole project with her project management and coordination, and I supported her in this process very closely. And then we had our data experts like Stuart Ross and Arno Parolini and Wei Tan and Kristen Diemer. And then we had our experts in program logic and the development of monitoring, research and evaluation frameworks. So it's quite a team. Can I just say that looks terribly expensive? It wasn't. There was only a couple of people were really paid fully in that process. So, you know, it was a terrific way of just bringing an interdisciplinary group together. And, you know, we were delighted by the ways in which there was such innovation in the philanthropic groups coming together to fund a project or projects with the family violence sector in Victoria. I noticed in a report I was reading recently that it was flagged as a very kind of exceptional and rare event for all of philanthropic organisations to get together like this in the family violence sector, and it was noted that this was an important development. So, you know, this was what provided the ability for us to get together as a team and to further some issues in relation to evidence gathering and data. Next, Gemma. So I guess just to be really clear, and I guess to build a bit further on what Robin was saying, there's a history to this. So that Lucy Healy, myself, Kristen Diemer, Stuart Ross, we're involved back in 2007 with the evaluation of and the researching about the regional integration committees. And so we were looking at the governance issues for those committees at that time. And out of that, we wrote a couple of program papers about the research, but also developed a practice tool, which was basically a matrix of what are the key standards and issues for the regional integration committees. And the 8th standard was around research and evaluation. So we're absolutely delighted, or I was delighted, and Stuart and Kristen were delighted to actually be able to come back and circle back to that early work with a further development. There's also, I guess, the authorising environment that was provided by the Royal Commission that said very clearly that support and report on implementation of data systems reforms, data collection analysis was clearly a role for the regional integration committees. So there was an authorising environment, and Robin raised some more of those issues, as well as a very, very good report by QUOC on family violence regional integration projects, strengthening the case for the future of regional integration. And again, we rafted off that report to go, actually, this is the next this is one of the developmental stages arising from that report as well. So in the RICKIE project, by the way, RICKIE stands for Regional Integration Committee Key Information and Evidence. So it's just a little acronym, but the project's become named the RICKIE project as a sort of a shorthand for trying to work with this project. So there were 2 practice aims. One was the capacity building and co-design of the monitoring, evaluation and research framework. So there was a capacity building and co-design part, which was based around the workshops we did. And I have to say, you would have noticed the cakes in the little pictures previously. Now, part of that, of course, is that you can't really have a launch without food and drink. And so we did want to pretend virtually that there was some partying going on for our launch. But also, we did in our application to DVVIC say that we would run data parties as part of the process of co-design and capacity building. And then someone on the first workshop said, why are they called parties? We went, well, actually, we just thought there was a bit of a branding issue, that not everyone loves data and that we should try and make these workshops a bit more fun. But then Gemma and I felt morally obliged to do some of the fun making, which meant that, we had some, along with all the serious work across the 3 workshops, we had some party games, we had lots of cake, there were lollies, so that we just tried to, I guess, go, working with data can be fun. And we were just wanting to make that point through the way in which we branded the workshops. And I guess the other really important aspect that David Rose will be speaking about soon is the delivering of the monitoring, evaluation, research framework. I think just to have a little caveat here, I know that some people hope there was a magic bullet out there in which our team would analyse all the data for your particular regional integration committees. Now, that was never framed to be part of this project, to do that sort of production of data reports. That's sort of the next stage. Our role was to look at the capacity building and to deliver a framework in which this project could be carried forward. So over to Gemma.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the process of developing the framework. And we took an action research methodological approach, and you can see here a little diagram about action learning. And can I say there was plenty of action and there was plenty of learning. So I think we really, we nailed that process.
In terms of developing the framework, we undertook semi-structured interviews with PSAs and chairs and other key stakeholders. And we also carried out these 3 workshops, 2 of which we called data parties, as Kathy was saying. So the interviews, we carried out 12 interviews, and they were semi-structured, and some were small group interviews and some were individual. And there was a total of sort of 26 participants in these interviews. And these were the kinds of questions that we asked. We were interested in what RICS really wanted to know in terms of monitoring and evaluation. What questions did they have that they wanted to answer? And in an ideal world, what data would they have access to enable them to answer those questions? So, and we asked, you know, what data they currently had access to, whether this comes regularly or not so regularly, whether it's difficult or easy to interpret, whether you can trust it or not, and what data do you want, do you need, but cannot get for various reasons, and what's the impact of that on your work. And also, what do you want to use the data for? And clearly, you know, there was a desire to use the data to improve the work of the RICS. So we did a bit of a SWOT analysis, so a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats analysis of this qualitative data. And these were some of the kinds of things that we found. So in terms of strengths, there was definitely, RICS were getting access to some data. There seemed to be a pretty strong emphasis in most of the interviews about the strengthening of governance arrangements and really strong setting of strategic priorities in the RICS that seemed pretty important in terms of thinking about what data could be used for. There was some very, very innovative work going on, and I'd like to draw attention to the data press in the Central Highlands that Jess Cadwallader has been overseeing and developing. This is a really, really significant and sophisticated approach to data that you know, we can all learn a lot from. And then, of course, there was the developing of this framework, which was seen as a strength. So some of the challenges, you know, there's challenges around access to relevant data sets, perhaps around the different boundaries, DHHS boundaries not sort of matching up with RIC boundaries completely, that reported data from government organisations, again, is not always accessible. And then the kind of, you know, it's really clear that different members of the RICS had different skills and knowledge in understanding and applying data. So some have very sophisticated understandings and others, and this would be me as well, don't necessarily have that ability to easily apply data. So that's an issue, and hence capacity building is important. So opportunities. So really what I heard in the interviews was that these were the things that you were wanting to do with data. So understanding gaps, patterns and pathways in your region or in the region, informing systems advocacy and local area planning was important, evaluating the effectiveness, I suppose, of multi-agency work in the region, doing some innovative work also, answering their own research questions. There was a strong interest in lived experience and also, you know, a desire to get to the point where qualitative data could be collected from women, children and men who are moving through the system. And then there's an opportunity to collaborate with FSV around getting access to Orange Door data, which was seen to be an important step in the process. So in terms of threats, it sounds a bit sinister, but it's really sort of more challenges, I suppose. You know, again, there was the challenge of the Orange Door data not being readily available to RICKS. Sometimes it was shared informally, at other times not. So a real need to collaborate closely with FSV and to move forward on data sharing arrangements. There was sometimes this impact of competitive funding where so local agencies didn't necessarily want to share their data with other local agencies if they were going for the same tenders. They didn't want to disclose necessarily this, that and the other thing. So that created a difficulty. Then there was the real need for to keep a regional and remote lens at the forefront of our minds, because you know, it can take a lot more resourcing to develop or deliver one service in a remote region than it would be to deliver that in a metro region. So maintaining that remote and rural lens. And then, of course, the sort of the lack of funding support for data projects. So, you know, we really need financial investment in this space to move this framework forward. So just a couple of quotes. This is about the portal, which is a real strength. The portal in the data press, there's a collection of the data from the services, and that's been one element of the project, so the local services. The portal actually takes all of that data and makes it mappable against publicly available data sets from Australian Bureau of Statistics and crime statistics agencies, so that if I want to look at a particular LGA, I want to look at referrals from regional services and I want to map it against AOD rates, that I can. So that's a pretty sort of special model that has emerged and been developed in the Central Highlands. I suppose the essence, when I had to think about it, of what people were saying that they wanted was this. I think it would be something really meaningful if we could somehow track and capture how people enter and leave the system, and how they come into, where they're referred from, how many times they've been into the system, and what's making this experience different. So really, there was a strong desire to understand if the service system is responsive to the needs of women, children, and men. And then, of course, so building on the interviews, we had these workshops and data parties. And really the first workshop was, you know, about really sort of establishing the consensus for the RICKIE project, setting out the aims and the methodology. So this, we really wanted to strongly engage with the sector, with the PSAs, with the chairs, because we felt this was your project. And we really wanted it to be bottom up, if you like, and driven by the RICKS. So we began to sort of sketch out a program logic for what the RICKS do that could be shared across them, because clearly the RICKS do slightly different things in slightly different in slightly different regions. Sorry, I'm just letting someone else into the room. And there was this acknowledgement of different sets of data literacy. In terms of the first data party, we fed back about the interviews Arno and Way discussed the data ecology wheel, and Jess presented on the data press. So there was a lot of learning in that data party too. And then in the second data party, we had this masterclass on the use of Tableau Public run by Way and Arno and Stuart. And we discussed, and Way and Arno have been developing an online module that is going to be freely available to continue that learning around Tableau Public. And Kathy will no doubt say a few more words about that. And then there was this discussion around further collaborations, Crime Statistic Agency, University of Melbourne, DV Vic, how we can sort of move things forward. And also, the idea of a particular funded role to assist PSAs to access the data that they need and to, present it to the PSAs in a way that is easily understandable. So I think that that's all from me. So I'll hand over to Associate Professor David Rose, who's the real brains behind the framework. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Gemma. And one of several, thank you. Welcome everybody. Yes, you've all got a link that's been sent across there on the chat for the actual framework. So I'm not going to go into all the sort of minor details of that, but really just to say, obviously the aims of what we were doing in setting up the framework was to look at both the monitoring, evaluation and the research functions and how we could incorporate that into the plan going forward. And I guess all of that recognises that all of those activities, whether it's monitoring, evaluation or research, is very heavily reliant on the data and the ability to access that data. So I'll come back to that in a moment. In the actual framework, so we can, which is the big table in the document that you will have, we can really see, I guess, three key focus areas of what we've looked at there. So the community service system monitoring, which is really answering questions like what are the key family violence trends in the region, what are the key service system usage trends in the region, and a lot of, I guess, the ability to answer that question is really, in fact, accessing that publicly available data we've been talking about, and so being able to move towards getting that in a consistent way across the state and across the different regions. The second, I guess, area that's a key basic level at this point, and so the framework reflects that, largely driven by, I think, the ability to access the data, but that as the data capacity of the different regions increases as well. So that sort of focus area of the framework is really around answering questions like what are the service system barriers for the different participants that are impacted by family violence in the area? Is there an increase in safety for victims and survivors in the region? Increase in accountability of perpetrators? Being able to record and look at what are the activities of the RICS and in what ways are they contributing to those outcomes at both the whole region level and across the actual outcomes linked to evaluation. So really not in that sense evaluating the RICS, but saying where do they fit and how are they contributing to those broader trends that are happening, which is, I think, very much an important part of then realising the value of the RICS being there and what they're actually doing. So what we have in the MRF at the moment is that framework for the initial part of that. So it utilises very much publicly available data, and then also some parts where we would say local, regional data is also needing to be collected. And I think, as Gemma's already alluded, we know there's quite varying levels of sophistication from things like what's there in Central Highlands through into other areas that may have very rudimentary capacity to get that data locally. So what we really know with that is that you know, for the evaluation framework and the monitoring functions, we'll need to be increasing that evaluation and data capacity over several years. So this slide here now really looks at then a multi-year strategy, particularly around data and data capacity, which will then support the ongoing development of the actual monitoring and evaluation framework. And just to recognise, even the table that's there in the document is obviously an initial starting point that will keep developing over the years as well as the sophistication of things develops. So what we have in this 3-year plan here for the data is really just to say first year will be very much around looking at the regional, local level data collection, what's available, how can that be brought together, what's missing, what's not, and starting to develop that into a plan. Second year, obviously implementing that as well as seeing what can be further got from publicly available data statewide. A particularly important point that came through very much from our consultations was also around bringing the lived experience client voice into that data, and so very much looking at how that can start to come out in that second year of what we're looking at there as well. And then obviously in the third year, starting to further implement and develop those sort of data systems that can then allow, I guess, more sophisticated answering of the evaluation and monitoring questions that we actually have in the framework. So that's my quick little run through it all, and I'll hand back over to, I think it's Kathy.
Okay, so just finishing off before we look at some questions. Firstly, it's very clear that this is like the end of the beginning rather than the end. And so thinking about the end of the beginning, we're very keen to make sure, and it's been terrific to have people from the PSA committee steering group say that they'll champion this and take it forward to look at how do we make sure that there's some carriage and steps taken with the statewide PSAs as well as at local level. And so Alison and Robin have been talking about making sure that they hold on to taking this forward, and I guess, you know, there'll be many others who also would not want this to sit on the shelf, but to make sure that it becomes something that the MRF becomes something that's actively worked with and used as a strategy to guide the development in this area. There's also, I guess, a strategy, particularly in relation to the Crime Stats Agency and the use of Tableau data, that it does look as though, and the Crime Stats Agency were very much a part of the workshops, saying, you know, we could do some work to make sure that we get more customised reporting, at least on the big data sets. So it's a step, it's not everything, but it's a step, and I guess partly the way in which there should be a development on that. I know that Wei and Arno have been developing the tutorial on the use of Tableau Public as a way of understanding that data platform and being able to find your way around it. So some of the PSAs were already using it, but there are others where they could see that there was a certain power in being able to use this, particularly as the CSA also uses Tableau data as a way of reporting the data. So thinking about strategically how you might just get, you know, a bit of a quick win there with the CSA. It's also pretty clear that further resourcing is needed, that a lot of, you know, the PSAs are really working extremely hard at local level, and having the ability to step up to look at an overarching strategy and put this in place across Victoria, as well as continuing the capacity building of the sector, probably needs some further funding and further resourcing, so that I think that people were excited by the way in which a relatively small resource could actually make quite a significant difference over this last year in terms of what could be done, and thinking about, is there a way of being able to continue that? And there's some recommendations in the report about that, and which is about the further development of data literacy and capacity building, saying, you know, that's a key, really important part of this project, but also the role of the RICKS. And we would say that we've had a number of conversations with Family Safety Victoria about the use of Orange Door data. You know, it's not saying we want everything. It's saying, you know, what is the Orange Door data that would be really helpful for regional planning in terms of understanding what's going into the Orange Door and what's coming out. So looking at those conversations being taken forward further, and there's been an appetite and a lot of cooperation within Family Safety Victoria to take that forward. So I guess there's some short-term and longer-term issues that we would think would be part of taking this project forward. We have been excited to be working with such talented people and to see the level of energy that's available to be working in this area. And so we'd just like to wish you all well with taking the next steps and to move things forward in a really progressive and positive way. And we'd like to thank you all for the opportunity we've had to work with you.
Thank you so much, Kathy, David and Gemma, Alison and Robin and Emma for presenting over the last hour. We're now going to move into a Q&A session. Emma, I'm just wondering if we can stop the screen sharing, and that way I can see the room, as it were. I'd like to invite people to submit questions to any of the speakers that we've had this morning. I think I was suggesting we do that through the chat. I mean, I'm happy to manage it if you just want to put your hands up as well, if you've got your cameras on, and I can take questions from the floor. Or I'm just seeing, is there anybody who'd like to put a question to any of the panelists? And well, it's a good thing that I've got some. I'm just wondering, maybe perhaps this is a bit of a question for Robin and Alison, or I mean, indeed any of the other PSAs who are on the call as well. If you can speak to what opportunities you think there are for the Statewide Family Violence Integration and Advisory Committee, so the statewide group of PSAs, in implementing the framework from here on in.
Thanks, Ellie. Robin, I'll answer this one if you like. So I would, on behalf of my statewide colleagues, thank everyone for their participation. Certainly very excited to have a strong framework that we can now use, as Kathy said, for sort of, what is it, the end of the beginning or the start of the beginning? I forget your exact words, but what we have now is something quite structured for us to be able to consider as a group and think about how we can actually find the best way forward to use data for all of those purposes that Robin mentioned when she introduced us to the background of the project. So we're certainly very excited to have something tangible that we're going to be able to sit and have a look at over the next couple of months, and we thank everyone for their efforts.
Thanks, Alison. Robin, did you want to add to that response?
Yeah, I think the opportunity has already been covered, but I think there's a lot of opportunity in terms of building regional integration committees' capability and capacity to collate data Now, some of that could be published or it could be unpublished data. We already receive data from that's been de-identified from RAMPs. For example, the committees receive a RAMP report. And I think moving forward, there's opportunity to build the capacity of the regional integration committees to look at that data and start to put a picture to it and look at where the points of service or system intervention have been, what the strengths and limitations may be. So the purpose of this framework is not always to share the data publicly, but I think for the regional committees it is to build that capacity and capability. And I think there's a lot of opportunity through partnerships and collaborations like Kathy and David mentioned with Crime Statistics Agency in terms of getting regional breakdown of data, which hasn't been available, particularly in times like this where we're seeing new themes emerging, where we don't have access to current data. So I think some of that snapshot data for the regional integration committees and having a platform like Tableau provides a lot of opportunity to start to gather that evidence base and build their capacity to look at the data but to understand it and be able to advocate and contribute to system reforms.
So you're talking about it having, there's not only, is it about creating a more formalised role for the regional integration committees, but it's also, it's a tool to build capacity and build data literacy as well. Is that
yeah, I think so. I think in terms of their internal learning, having access to that data and having that data in one place. We have the family violence portal, for example, that's available, but start to break that data down and to have conversations about what people are seeing, to have members of the regional integration committees contribute to that as well. I think that literacy is really important in the first phase, but also the opportunities for partnerships at a local and a regional level and statewide where we haven't necessarily had access to that data. So it's about not just the data collation, it's about what's this data telling us, what are the themes that are emerging, and doing that in an ethical way as well. Because I think, you know, there's a lot of pressure on services and you start to talk about monitoring and so we're not comparing the same things in every region, but there might be particular strengths in particular regions or gaps or small communities that are experiencing things slightly differently that we can start to learn from and look at what those particular differences are.
And as Rose has mentioned in the chat, to build the consistency across the regions as well.
Yeah.
Thanks, Robin. Are there any questions? Any other questions from the floor in the chat that anyone wants to pose? I'm just flicking through my screen so I can look to see if anyone's got their hands up. Okay. Who do you think, and I guess this could go to any of the panellists, who do you think the key stakeholders are to engage and collaborate with in what comes next?
If you want me to just say something briefly about that, look, I think that you have, at the moment, you know, you've got someone in Family Safety Victoria who is keen to take forward discussions about orange door data and the RICKIE, and that's a sort of a pretty basic conversation. I know that not everyone's got the orange door, most people haven't, but if it could be negotiated and sorted out at this point, you've actually got a bit of championing in there with someone who kind of understands. So I'd seize the moment while they're still in that role, because, you know, who knows what roles will still be in place and in time at this point. So I think there's something to be done there. I also think, you know, there's a moment around the CSA as well, where, you know, they're saying that they, you know, out of these workshops, that they would want to be cooperative and see if they could develop a report for that was more customised to the RICS. And again, I think that's an opportunity. That's an immediate opportunity that should be seized before people move on, or while there's still sort of a head of steam.
I'd support that too, Kathy. I think there's been a real willingness to come to those meetings and have those conversations with CSA and family safety. And I think also DVVIC has a role to play as well in terms of the data within the Family Violence Portal and the Royal Commission recommendations, working with regional integration committees to develop a consistent platform, but also to be able to use that platform to inform advocacy and reform contributions as well.
Can I just say one other thing? I think that we began to explore the role of the data press, and I think that that requires quite detailed work to see what the capacity would be for any other RIC to be involved in data that came through the data press. And again, I don't think that's been fully explored, but you know, there's a sort of that along with the Tableau data work, capacity building issues that require, you know, some excitement or interest from others to drive that forward.
So a few things to springboard off that this project has instigated. We think a few different angles to pursue. So there's a question from the floor. The long-term outcome of the framework notes the increased safety of victims and increased accountability of perpetrators. While the framework clearly focuses on improved integration, I wonder whether there are any thoughts that the additional data information may be needed within the framework to be able to ensure it was contributing towards the long-term outcome. I don't know, is that a question that you can take, Kathy or Gemma or David?
I could pass that one to David. Yeah.
Thanks. Yes, thanks, Kerry. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the point we're sort of making, where particularly for the evaluation components of the framework at the moment, it's at a quite rudimentary level. They would be obviously what you'd be wanting to look at as the long-term outcomes you're looking at. And that's also the point around having some elements in there which are looking at what the RICS are actually doing as the pathway to that. That would obviously also need to become more sophisticated if you were truly, in fact, looking at the sort of attribution stuff of is the regional committees actually leading to that change in the family violence sort of stuff. So at the moment it's at the basic level of that, but that would need to obviously become much more sophisticated as the years go by and the data collection gets more sophisticated.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that, you know, what everyone really wants to find out, you know, particularly for victim survivors, is, you know, what's their trajectory, and is their trajectory through the system making a difference to them. There are some really ethical issues, though, about data tracking based on individual unit record data, and it's really whether you're going to keep this data at the level of of de-identified trends, or whether you're going to look. And there are some pretty big issues, you know, like, do women really want to be tracked from the orange door to the various service organisations that they might then pick up on? You know, and, you know, those are really quite profound ethical questions that would need to be addressed if you wanted to really do looking at unit record data. And so I think there's lots of discussion to be had because that's what everyone wants to know, is the individual woman's trajectory, has that changed? But it's also the most difficult to grapple with in ways that are ethical and safe. So there are probably steps before that that can give you trend pictures, which are also extremely valuable.
Thank you, Kathy. Thanks. There's a question about kind of applying a cultural lens to the data framework, and in particular having the contribution of Aboriginal community-controlled organisations as well. Was that something that came up in the process of developing the framework, or anything that you can speak about in terms of next steps?
I would say it hasn't been discussed in the first phase, because really the engagement was with the principal strategic advisors, chairs and auspices through the interviews. But I think there's real opportunity within the regional integration committees in terms of considering how do we apply that lens within practice and implementing the framework. And it's certainly referred to in terms of having a look at particular data, but how do you do that in a culturally safe and ethical way? And I think the points Kathy raised are very important, and they came up a lot in our conversations, and people very clearly wanting to move to that research phase or lived experience phase of evaluation and implementing the framework. And I think that's where we need to consider who do we partner with and collaborate with, so that that work can be done in a safe and ethical way, rather than identifying gaps and issues that are stigmatising or stereotyping and putting people at risk. So I think it is something in the next phases we need to look at.
So Robin, it's Nina Levin here from VACA. It would be good for you to contact VACA into our evidence and outcomes research team as well, and also to the family violence. I'm the manager, because we do have the largest family violence footprint in Victoria of state-funded and Commonwealth-funded family violence programs. So we can actually be able to support and assist you as well, and looking at it culturally sensitive with our outcomes frameworks too.
Good idea. Thanks. Good for making that connection. Thanks,
Really
Nina.
important.
Yeah. There's a question from Helen at Wynn about the connection, the relationship between this work and the information sharing regime and other statewide reform initiatives. I don't know if that's something you spoke to earlier on in your presentation. Do one of the PSAs want to take that question?
So I'll have a crack at it if you like, Ellie. Helen, don't know that we've actually turned our mind to a formal relationship with the information sharing regime. I'm happy to be guided if I've missed something along the way. But certainly, you know, from a PSA member of the RICKIE project point of view, we absolutely want to understand how all the different mechanisms that we've applied through the reform are changing the lived experience or the trajectory of victim, survivor or perpetrator's lives. So keen to have a chat to you offline about where your mind is in that space, if that's at all useful. And your second question, how we could address who's going to lead this work going forward. Certainly from the statewide PSA group, we have got a copy of the final report, which we're very grateful for, and we haven't had time to meet yet and consider that, but we will certainly have a very, very good look at that over the next couple of months. And as I understand it, this is a document that will be publicly available, and that's an excellent thing, so that people have an opportunity to look at this. But it also does have a good contribution from the PSA group around the state, so we'd be keen to have a look at it as well and think about next steps.
Now, are there any other questions from the floor or in the chat I've missed? No. Jess, I noticed you had a couple of comments. I don't know if you want to speak to them or whether people will have seen them in the chat.
I'm happy to just flag that we're just tidying up the last few threads of the phase 1 of the Data Press portal, which was only made possible thanks to the Ross Foundation's funding. We've been working with CERDI, which is the Centre for E-Research and Digital Innovation at Federation University, our local, and they've been designing this for us. They do a lot of kind of design of database systems and particularly mapping of data, so visual kind of mapping of it. And I suppose I just wanted to flag that we've had some initial conversations with them about the possibility of adding other regions to the Data Press and making it flexible enough to tailor to different sets of data that particular regional integration committees might be wanting to collect, but it would also give people access to the array of publicly available data that we have collected together as of relevance to family violence work. So that's definitely something I'm keen to keep talking to people about.
Thanks, Jess. Thanks for speaking to that. Now, I might wrap the Q&A up here, but I've got to, is everybody, are we just calling this thing the MRF, or is there, I heard you refer to it as the MRF, Kathy. Is that gonna catch on?
I don't think so. I think it's up to, it seems to me that there is a clear need for a working group, you know, based on, you know, who the champions are, who really want to take a range of these issues forward. Mm-hmm. You know, and I guess, you know, we just came up with the RICKIE project as a way of having an easy branding of this project. But in terms of, at the moment, we've just called this the Monitoring, Evaluation, Research Framework. And I think, you know, it's your document, and it's really the working group thinking about, well, is there a better name for this? That'd be good. As you say, needs a better name. But I do think that that's part of the working group, you know, and that the establishment of a working group of people that are really interested and passionate about the way in which you might use data, you know, taking forward the Tableau Public work, taking forward the Data Press work, taking forward the issues in relation to FSV and the issues in relation to CSA, you know, the Community, the Crime Statistics Agency, you know, that there's just a range of work that is exciting and could be really done well. And I think too, if you want to get a resource, then getting it into the next budget cycle would be really important. Because this whole work will be facilitated much, much better if you can get a resource into the system.
Thank you, Kathy. So with that, I'm actually going to hand over to John Duck to wrap up our session. And thank you, John. Over to you.
Oh, thanks, Alison and everyone. For some reason, I've been asked to wrap this session up because I think Alison McLean referred to me as Papa Smurf, given the acronym of the agency today. So that's why I'm, as the oldest, have to get to do this. But I've been an advocate for this type of work for a long time. I've only been doing the PSA in Goulburn for a short period of time, about 12 months, but data is really the key to enabling the work that we do. And many of you will remember the slide that showed what the regional integration committees are trying to do is just put together that jigsaw puzzle of all the pieces that are funded separately coming together to actually improve. And I have been really happy to go through this pretty extensive process. And, you know, I was one of the ones that had this view that there'll be a golden bullet at the end of it that'll actually give us everything we possibly need to know about. And it wasn't until we got to Data Party 3 that we explored the Data Press and then Tableau Public, that I think it was Arno who said, you know, all this stuff gives you is the information that's freely available. It's the actual question you're asking that's the important bit of work, and that's what I've loved about seeing the framework document come out, because what it provides is, here's all this information available for you, and here are, I think, 6 strategies and 7 or 8 recommendations for you to consider. But you need to understand what the question is you're going to need to ask right at the beginning. And for many of our implementation committees, that will be different. So what we need to have is a consistent approach to the application of that question in both our localised regional committees, but also at a statewide level. So I've been really happy, and I know many of the PSAs who participated and the chairs and others who participated really valued the approach of Melbourne Uni. You know, they, and to use, I think, Gemma, your term, where you mined our information. So through the consultations and then the data parties, you actually sought everything we knew and hoped to know about this. And, you know, by bringing in as many highly qualified but really smart people to assist us, you produced a great document. So thank you everyone for what you've been able to achieve. I do want to thank the funders. So through DV-VIC, this great approach that you're having of bringing in independent funding to provide outstanding outcomes. So the organisations that actually tipped in and could see the value of it, guided by DV-VIC and our own submission to them, has really produced a document that we can now go forward with. You've heard that the PSA group haven't really considered this in any great detail, but you know, we see the value in enabling something to happen quickly so that we don't lose momentum for what has already been achieved. So in closing, I just want to thank all those people. So our funders primarily who got it going, DV-VIC who actually managed it on their behalf and our behalf, but also Melbourne University and the large range of people who actually made a contribution to enabling this product to come together. So thank you to all those people, and we look forward to actually moving on this as soon as we can. Thank you, Alison.
Some exciting possibilities there, and thank you to all of you for giving us an hour and a half of your Monday morning. I hope it's been useful. Emma has put the link to the framework on the Lookout site in the chat there, but I'm sure that information will be circulated so that you can find it easily after this session.
Could I just add one more thank you, Alison?
Of course, go ahead.
I just want to thank the members of the reference and governance groups who actually contributed a huge amount to both the content and the process of the RICKIE project. So we really couldn't have done it without you, and we feel, you know, you were there every step of the way, and yeah, our heartfelt thanks.
Hear, hear. Thanks, Gemma. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you all soon.
Thank you.